Hey everyone, welcome back to step 3 in our table making process, which is pouring resin. Alright, before we go ahead and pour resin, we have to select the right type of resin. So know that there are resins that are made to only be poured 1/8 of an inch thick. Those are usually for flood coats. There are also resins that are 1 inch thick, good for charcuterie boards, 2 inch, and I've even seen 3 inch, and those are typically for tables and deeper pours. Now, what happens if you take a 1 inch pour and you pour it 2 inches thick? Now, I'm sure that's on a lot of people's mind. Well, what happens is this. You'll pour the resin and the exothermal process will kick in and it'll start to generate a lot of heat. That heat will cause the resin to harden very quickly within hours. And because it's going to harden and expand so quick and so fast, you could end up splitting your actual resin. So we have to select the right one. As for me, my table is a 2 inch pour. It's 2 inches thick, the wood. So I bought a 2 inch thick pour resin. So I was lucky also because it was a cold day. So what I did is I just opened up the windows, let the cold into my shop, and then I put fans on the top of the actual table where the resin was to keep it cool. 48 hours later, the resin was pretty firm and we were good to go. In this video today, I'm going to show you how to mix your resin, add your mica powder, and make sure that your pour is 100% successful. So stick around because this pour starts right now. All right, everyone. So today we are pouring our resin, and I have a helper with me today, Nick. Nick is interested in learning how to pour resin and stuff, so he is going to be helping me while I sit upstairs drinking some beer and eating some chips. But first, before we can pour, we're going to first scratch down the layer of resin that's right there now. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and the reason why is because the new resin will bond to the old resin better if it has something to grip onto. Anyways, so we're going to start now, and we're going to first start off, like I said, by sanding down the actual resin and then cleaning it with isopropyl alcohol, and then when that's all done, we'll start pouring. So stick around. So to sand down this resin, all we're going to do is we're going to take 120 grit sandpaper and we're going to throw it on the 5-inch orbital and scratch it all up as best as we can. It's really not important to have any form on this kind of sanding. Once all the sanding is done, we're just going to take a vacuum cleaner, vacuum everything up, and then break out that isopropyl alcohol and clean that table. Now, the reason we're using that isopropyl alcohol is we want to ensure that if we had any grease or any dirt on our hands, it doesn't cause any problems for the new resin to adhere to the old resin. Alright, so as you see, we have the epoxy that was our first pour completely sanded. We used the alcohol to clean it all, and we're ready now to start mixing our resins. So for this, as I mentioned, we are using the R-Cast epoxy. I've used it several times. It's a great epoxy, and we're going to be coloring it with what's called Diamond Deep Blue Sea. This is what the client requested, and so we're going to go ahead and mix it all together. Give it some time, bubbles will come up to the top. We're going to torch the top. We're going to pour it into our form, and bubbles will continue to come up, and we'll just have to monitor it for the next 10 to 12 hours to ensure that we break all the bubbles on the top. All right, so here we go. By the way, PPE, always use it. This stuff is dangerous if it gets in your lungs, okay? So I'm going to be disconnecting my microphone because no one's going to be able to hear me anyway, and I will do a voiceover from this point and explain what's going on. So we started off with 2 3-gallon kits of R-Cast, and you can see the box there in the bottom left corner. And when you're pouring in the epoxy, which are the blue jugs, there's no time limit really at that point. It's when you add in the white jug, which is the hardener, that's when you're now on a clock. And then from there, I'll let it just drain in and I'll take its time. Then I'll start adding the mica powder. Now I'll measure out the mica powder to ensure that I have the exact same amount in both buckets. Now, after we've added the mica powder, we just start mixing, and don't rush this. Take your time. You can easily take 10-15 minutes just mixing, and that's what I do. Is you see I have that phone on the floor and I'm watching that timer on it to ensure that I have a good mix so I don't have any soft spots in my resin. Here comes my favorite part, pouring the resin.
Now, there isn't much of a secret to the resin. Just pour it in gently. You don't want to splash it everywhere, but you want it to rest, of course. Tilt the bucket on its side and make sure you get every drop of that resin, because, hey, that's wasted money that's left in that bucket. One thing to know is that we originally mixed 6 gallons of resin and it wasn't enough. So I mixed one more bucket full, which was another 3 gallons. So in total, that was 9 gallons of resin. And that came out to close to $1,000 in resin alone. So I must admit, I was a little nervous, because when you're pouring $1,000 worth of resin, you hope to God your form doesn't have a leak somewhere. And well, I've been lucky so far where I've never had a leak. Nothing major, maybe a little bit coming out of the side where I could just use some tape and some silicone to stop the leak. But I must admit, one of my biggest nightmares would be to, pour $1,000 worth of resin and go to bed a couple hours later to wake up next morning and see that resin leaked out all over the floor. And there is not only a huge mess all over your floor, but $1,000 of resin wasted. Thankfully, that has never happened. And I typically pour always in the mornings as early as I can so that I can keep an eye on it all day. And usually by the time I'm going to bed, sometimes I stay up till 2, 3 in the morning, I am able to monitor it, and by that point it's thickening up and I have nothing to worry about at that point. So after about a week of letting it just sit there, I then start to remove the form, and I gotta put a little muscle into it and pop the table from the actual form, because although resin doesn't really stick to tuck tape, it sticks a little bit. So you've got to use a bit of a crowbar kind of a thing and just gently pick it up, and then you just hear pop and then it's loose. And after that point, I'm off to Englewood Furniture so they can flatten it for me using their ultra wide planer. So at this point, I'm working in my basement of my home, and I gotta admit, one thing I didn't think of is how heavy that wood is, and then adding 9 gallons of resin. That tabletop came out to over 300 pounds, and I gotta admit, bringing it up the stairs from my basement was a killer. Hey, if you like the videos I'm making, I hope you take a moment out and maybe give me a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you join me in step 4, where we go to Englewood Furniture and we flatten the tabletop. Thanks for sticking around.